A journey with intention and never fail to mention that we go hard every time we go in. Everything I'm feeling must be something I've been missing. However, all the
Welcome to season 2 of Book Babes Read. For our new viewers, thank you for joining us. And for our returners, thank you for coming back. We are super excited to be filming today. You know, it's been a while. Like many of you, we've been home, taking care of ourselves and making sure we stay away from others to keep our families and friends safe. But we're back. So before we begin, please make sure you take a second and subscribe to our channel. We'll wait. All right, so let's reintroduce ourselves and then we'll jump right in. I'm Danica.
Hey y'all, I'm Bridget.
I'm Takesha.
And I'm Erin.
So today we are throwing it back to an urban novel from the 90s. Yes, we are throwing it back to one of your favorites from junior high school or high school. Before reality TV, we had books such as Flyy Girl, one of my all-time favorites. So today we'll be discussing Flyy Girl by Omar Tyree.
Omar Tyree is a fellow HBCU grad from Howard University's class of 1991 with a degree in journalism. He is also a New York Times bestselling author who has written 16 books and sold over 2 million copies. His accolades include an NAACP Image Award and a Phyllis Wheatley Literary Award. In addition to his literary works, he also speaks a lot on the community's issues. And the Flyy Girl book that was released as a screenplay on Amazon is supposed to be turned into a movie. Yes.
Thank you, Bridget. So in this coming of age book, we see many themes such as love, sex, drugs, family, evolving friendships. But the one I want to start off on is with the family structure. And so Dave, Tracy's dad, decides to leave the family home, and Patty, Tracy's mom, has a hard time with this, but he still decides to leave. And so I kind of want to talk about how does his decision to leave affect Tracy's development, and what was Patty's role in this?
So one of the things that I noticed in the book is that, like, her dad just left and was just gone. Like, he was living in a whole nother place. He was gone for years, but he will pop in and out of, like, their family's lives. At one point, Tracy's mom ends up having her little brother in between this. So, like, they're still together, but not together. And, like, her mom is just like, it's fine, it's okay. He's upkeeping the house, he's sending her money, like, everything is taken care of financially. So it's like, it's not that big of a deal. So I feel like that definitely played a role in how Tracy's seen relationships and how she interacted with different people.
I also think that when you think about like a family structure like that and like the build out, I'm not sure how healthy it really is, because I think two things. The first thing I thought was, okay, what if he had stayed, right? And they were unhappy? Like, what does that look like for the build out of a family, right? And then I'm like, but he left and he dipped. Like, I don't know that that was the best way to handle it either. So I don't know. I do think it played a role in the way that Tracy turned out, but I also think options were a little bit limited, and I don't know. Like, I'm kind of on the fence about it, because a part of me feels like when you have a child, you make a commitment, you need to stay in that child's life, and that part I stand by. But the other part is I don't agree with people being in unhappy households, because I don't think that it really brings forth fruitful children, because you don't actually learn the definition of love.
Go ahead.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, but I think part of it was that they were not fully separated either. Yeah. Dave maintained a certain degree of control over Patty that was pretty unhealthy. Patty wasn't able to move on and date. He made sure that he was paying the bills so that he could have control and make sure that he had Patty where he wanted her. And I think that was also really unhealthy for Tracy to see. It's kind of like how Victor was dangling her sometimes. He had this little control over her, and she allowed it to continue, but that's also what she saw with her mother and her father. So, and I also think that the way Dave popped in and out, it was almost as if Tracy was always vying for his attention. And we see her doing that later with the men or the boys that come into her life. So I think that that unstable family structure really did play a huge role in how she turned out. And I agree, like, if you're unhappy, you leave. But they never really completely figured anything out. And I think that that's where they went wrong.
Do you know, or sorry, Coco, I know she's ready to kill me, but do you notice, I guess, that happens a lot, I guess, in like family structures in like Black households, where I feel like the men sometimes leave, but the women are still tied to them somehow. Like I've seen it several times in like instances in my family where they're not together, but then you see a kid pop up, or you see the man come back time and time again, just kind of in and out. And I wonder like how many of us have internalized the same things, but didn't necessarily act out in the same way as Tracy too. So that's just another alternative to consider.
Well, did the book say why he was unhappy? It was just like, I'm just leaving, right? Was there?
They had a lot of arguments.
Okay. And they were young. They were, okay. Yeah, so. Okay, so.
Could have been something she learned in her household.
That's true too.
So I also now want to take a look at Rahima's upbringing and how her parents played a role in both her and Mercedes' life. Because in the book, Rahima is very academic. She's in school, whereas her sister is like the complete opposite and goes out into the streets and, you know, does something completely different. But Rahima's father and mom were in the house together. And he was very, I guess, strict. So how did that affect both her and her sister's upbringing?
Well, I think that that's similar to what Takesha mentioned about like an unhealthy relationship where both parents decide to stay, whether it's for the children or whatever it was. I mean, to me, it seemed like their relationship was abusive. The father was not only abusive to the mother, but also to the children in different ways. And so I think, yeah, there were two ways to react to that. Mercedes acted out. She wanted no parts of it at all. I mean, you see, she doesn't even want to come to the house. And then Rahima, I think she just had a really hard time having relationships with men because of her father. Like even healthy relationships, she couldn't identify when someone wanted to treat her well. I mean, I'm thinking about Bruce and, you know, how he truly liked her, but she just wasn't. Okay, yes. but Bruce really liked Rahima, and she wasn't able to have a healthy relationship with him, I think really just because he was a male and for no other reason than that. So, you know, it can be very damaging.
I look at how Mercedes looked at her mom, and she had no respect for her mom at all, staying in that type of relationship. So yeah, you can have two parents together, but like I think one of you said earlier, if it's a toxic relationship, what does that look like for the children? What kind of example are you setting for the kids? And you know, if one of your kids do understand what's going on, they might lash out in a way that's very unexpected. And in the book, she goes on, you know, drugs and then meets all these men, and all because she felt like her mom could never step away from the father, and the father was way too controlling. So in that case, I would say, you know, it would be best to separate because you're doing more damage than good in the household.
I also say that perspective is like a thing, right? So like you could have two people who experience the exact same situation at the exact same time, and for some reason one person can take away from that, like, I'm gonna dive into school and figure it out on my own, I don't ever want to live like this. And then someone else can say, like, this has been too much for me, I think that drugs are my way out. So I think it also speaks just to like the dynamic of like how you as a person sometimes perceive things, and like no one knows how that'll play out. But I agree, like it's definitely toxic, and it's like when those two toxic things happen, you're more likely to have someone who's going to experience some type of dramatic experience in their life too.
Yeah, I was definitely going to add to that too. Looking at the two sisters, it's like you have Mercedes, the one who went like buck wild and was just like, you know, I'm getting out of this house. You're telling me no, but I'm going to do what I want in my freedom. And then you also have Rahima, where she's like, well, if I'm a good girl, I won't get beat up. If I'm a good girl, I won't experience these things in my life. And then when you look at like Tracy and her family household, Tracy took on a lot of elements of her mother and her father because she became controlling in a lot of her relationships as well.
All right, so let's move on to the theme of love and hate. So there are variations of love in the book. We see Tracy's love for her family and for boys, of course, Bruce, and we can't forget Victor. And then we also see hate, like, for instance, Rahima's hate for anything that's not academic. So I first want to look at Tracy's love for boys, and we're going to talk about Bruce and Victor and any other one that you can remember. What are your thoughts on either of these relationships? I'll start. Tracy was fast. Tracy was a fast girl, and that could be because of her upbringing, but she was looking for attention all in the streets, and it wasn't really good for her.
Yeah, I would side that, and I'd also say that I think people sometimes forget the power of like love and feeling infatuation, and so I feel like a little bit she was addicted to this idea, like you said, attention, love, infatuation. She gets into these really deep situations, and it's like she can't figure out her way out sometimes, and I think it's because love is sometimes that intoxicating. We've all been there where we've been in situations where we're like, now as adults, but in those teenage years, you couldn't tell us nothing. So I feel like I saw a lot of that in Tracy. So like I had a side, I think, of empathy for like the reasons why she wanted so badly to be loved. But then the other part of me was kind of like you, like if you don't sit your little fast self down.
I also thought about how she did take away a lot from Patty. And one of the things I think, we see from the beginning is that Patty looked at Dave as a prize. And everyone was kind of envious of her and how he took care of her. And then we see like throughout the book, Dave continues to like dote on them, and he just gives $400 for Christmas, and he just comes and he throws money around. And so when Tracy has a relationship with Timmy, and we see him doing the same thing, right? And I'm like, her parents put her in that. To me, they set an example for her to think that that's what a relationship is about, or that's what love is about. And so now we see her dealing with an abusive relationship because of those examples. So, that's something I really thought about reading it the second time around.
Yeah, I would definitely add too, like she was in love with materialistic things. Like that girl, if it was name brand, if he was the next hottest thing, that's what made her fast, because she was jumping from the cutest thing to the next cutest thing. Like it was a mess, because for her, like you said, like her family set her up to believe that like, okay, you are this like princess, you are supposed to be this like well-dressed person and like this image of like perfection. And that's what her mother always was too. Like her mother prided herself on being this materialistic, perfect wife for her husband that was barely even there.
Yes, I agree with all of that. So towards the end of the book, Tracy decides to, turn her life around. She's a little bit more mature. She has a lot of different experiences under her belt. What do you think are some of the biggest causes of this change, this life change?
I think when you see someone else hit rock bottom, that usually will shake your world up, because I know for me personally, if I see somebody and I'm headed down the same path as them and I saw that car crash, like I'm not gonna go crash my car too. I already seen it. So I think for her, one, time usually does mature you just in general too. And I think if you have a solid enough foundation as a child, even if it's like a small foundation of that, you'll grow into whatever it is you're supposed to. Like teenage years, like, yeah, it's all over the place and sometimes you lash out, but I do think if you at your core were supposed to be something, you tend to turn back into that something you were supposed to be. And I also think when you see someone else just doing terribly and you realize that that's not really your lifestyle, like you really don't want to do that, then you'll turn your life around. So I think personally that's kind of what changed her.
It's interesting that you say that, because as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right, because it was Mercedes who sent her on this path. Yes. Remember, it was a conversation that she had with Mercedes when she was a little kid in like elementary, right? Elementary and middle school. Yeah. So she was like, oh, okay, this girl's doing all these things, all these boys like her and all this stuff. Like, oh, I'm about to go on her path. And then she seen like the end of her path and was like, oh no, this is not the life I want.
Yeah, I definitely think that was one of the biggest causes for her change, seeing Mercedes cracked out in that crack house, right? That's
I was gonna say it like that.
I mean, that kind of like woke her up. And also, I think at that point she started hanging out with the college kids and was on campus, so she had a different like group of influences around her, and that helped her to see the world in a different way. And so, like you said, when you see people hit rock bottom, and then when your group around you changes, what is it, birds of a feather flock together type thing, that could change your whole perspective on life, and you change yourself. Well, now it's time to transition to Rate That Book. For our new viewers, Rate That Book is a segment where we rate the book we're discussing, a rating from 1 to 5, and we use one adjective to describe it. So make sure you choose wisely. Are you ready? All righty. I'll begin. Nostalgic.
Flyy.
Provocative.
Timeless.
Oh, look at that. We all have 4s. Okay. Well, there you have it. Fly Girl by Omar Tyree in a nutshell. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and
Please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment at Book Babes Read. Thank you.
Please, no, the clock will tick. So while you get lit, focus on your grind. You'll reach your prime. When it's your time, will you remember? You shine.
Two separate styles fight the mesh within the anguish. Misunderstood, unable to speak each other's language. Where the symmetries align, I have hopes been crushed. Loyalty, while our eyes wide shut on some Stanley Kubrick. Life's a puzzle like a rubrics in which you begat these other notes flat. Sing your soul in memory, you're sweet and lingering. I'll take it with me to the next, if anything's left, right?